It's 1389. The First Battle of Kosovo had just concluded with an Ottoman victory. The Serbs and the Bosnians are crushed, and the way is open to Hungary. This is quite remarkable, because less than a century ago, the Ottomans ruled nothing more than a small province in western Anatolia. In just 50 years they had grown powerful, capturing several small states and parts of the dying Byzantine Empire. More importantly, they gained a foothold in Europe. As fate had it, around the same time the two principal powers in the region, Bulgaria and Serbia, fragmented into several feuding principalities. This lack of unity was exactly what the Ottomans needed. Unlike the comfortable and complacent Christians, their state is set up for one thing alone: war. One by one, the Bulgarian and Serbian principalities are consumed, and the Byzantines don't fare any better. While this was going on, Hungary still enjoyed a golden age under its Angevin rulers. So much so that King Louis I could even indulge in such luxuries as a dynastic war in Naples, or crusades against pagans in Bosnia and Lithuania. Fighting the Turk falls to his successor, Sigismund of Luxembourg. Sigismund takes the throne in 1387, and by 1390 he already has to face bands of Ottoman irregulars pillaging the border region. To counter this, a grand coalition of Hungarians, Poles, Burgundians, Italians and Wallachians is formed. But the Crusaders barely manage to reach south of the Danube when they are catastrophically defeated at Nicopolis. After this failure, Sigismund resigns himself to go on the defensive. To this end, he orders a series of fortifications to be built on the southern border of Hungary. To augment these, Sigismund initiates a program of partnership with the rulers of the small states along the border, rewarding them with land grants in Hungary in return for their cooperation. This mostly works in the case of Serbia, but the alliance with Wallachia proves to be volatile, and the one with Bosnia impossible, as this kingdom has already been lacking central authority for a while. In fact, the Ottomans already exert such pressure that the rulers of these small states find it extremely hard not to submit. The Ottoman Empire had already set up the first standing army in the 1360s, something unheard of in contemporary Europe. Its core is formed by the Janissaries. The Janissaries are an elite force of light infantry, known for their excellent discipline, resilience, and loyalty to the Sultan. They are armed with bows and sabers, and various other armaments. Their role on the battlefield is to act as an immovable block of infantry that can nonetheless go on the attack at a moment's notice. The Janissaries are augmented by a small number of household cavalry, who are almost as well armoured as Western knights. They are armed with bows, lances, sabers, and shields. The most numerous section of the professional army is made up of the Sipahi cavalry. Like Western knights, the Sipahi draw their income from a landed estate. But unlike them, they don't own these estates. Land in the Ottoman Empire is the property of the Sultan, and the Sipahi can only use it on a transactional basis. This ensures very high standards of readiness and unconditional loyalty to the Sultan. The Sipahi are likewise armed with lance, bow, saber, and shield, and act as light cavalry on the wings of the army. Additionally to these professional soldiers, there are also an equal number of irregulars. The Akinji are light cavalry, armed with bows and whatever else they could find. Their counterpart in the infantry are the Azaps, armed with bows and sabers. These irregulars are throwaways on the battlefield, however their capacity to raid and harass the enemy is immeasurable. They are the ones responsible for the early raids against Hungary. Hundreds or even thousands of Akinji can be mobilized at a few days' notice, descending unobserved on the border regions. Robbery, rape, arson and enslavement follow, and by the time the Hungarians mobilize, the Akinji are long gone. Opposing them, Hungary in the 15th century is a far cry from the superpower that it was in the 14th century. Similarly to the Ottoman sultans, the Angevin kings used to own almost all the land in the country, with very few large hereditary estates to go around. Additionally to this, they were the sole proprietors of Europe's largest gold mines and salt mines. As a result, Hungarian kings could act independently and decisively, never lacking the funds to field an army. All this changed during the rule of Sigismund of Luxembourg. Sigismund had to contend for the throne with the King of Naples, and the support of the nobility did not come cheap. By the time Sigismund became the undisputed king of Hungary, the royal domain was decimated. Powerful families who backed him carved out hereditary estates the size of provinces for themselves. Besides being King of Hungary, Sigismund is also elected Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia. But these titles help him very little. Getting money from the German princes is next to impossible, and the Czech lands are a veritable disaster. The Hussite Wars that last from 1419 to 1434 consume vast resources that would be sorely needed for the defence of the southern border. Thus the Ottoman raids continue, as the Kingdom of Hungary loses the initiative and the confidence of its allies. These are the times when John Hunyadi commences his meteoric rise. Hunyadi was born around 1407. His origins are obscure, but his family is believed to have come over from Wallachia after his father entered Sigismund's service. Hunyad Castle and a respectable estate were granted to them in 1409. This is from where the family takes its name. Another theory that cannot be confirmed states that John Hunyadi is in fact Sigismund's illegitimate child. But regardless of his origins, the young Hunyadi was looking forward to a very bright future. In the 1430s, Hunyadi accompanied Sigismund on long tours of Italy and Bohemia, where he familiarized himself with the warfare of the Italian condottieri and the Czech Hussites. He also spent extended periods in the south, learning the hit-and-run light cavalry tactics of the Turks. By the end of the decade, the situation in the south turns from bad to worse. In 1437, a peasants' revolt devastates Transylvania. Exploiting this, the Ottomans team up with the Wallachians and launch a destructive raid. 1 year later, in 1439, they capture Smederevo, the last major fortress in Serbian hands. They can do this with impunity because under the new King Albert, royal authority in the defence of the southern realm become ever weaker. To remedy this, Albert names Hunyadi Ban of Serenyi. Serenyi is the worst place to be in Hungary. In 1429, Sigismund had granted the province to the Teutonic Knights, and it only took the Ottomans and the Wallachians 3 years to kick them out. The upside is that the commission elevates Hunyadi into the ranks of the high nobility. But its star really begins to rise after the death of King Albert. Albert had left no male heir, only a pregnant wife. The Hungarian nobles decide that they would be better off if they elect the 16-year-old King of Poland, Vladislaus, rather than going with an unborn child who might not even be a boy. But as it turns out, the child is a boy, and to the bane of historians, he's called Ladislaus. For ease of comprehension, we'll just call him by his Hungarian name, Laszlo. Even though Laszlo is just a baby, he is fully legitimate, unlike Vladislaus, who has no legal claim whatsoever to the throne. Predictably, a civil war breaks out between two leagues of the barons. The one declaring for Vladislaus is supported by Hunyadi, while the one for Laszlo is led by Ulrich von Silly, a creature of Sigismund and one of the most powerful nobles in the country. Since Laszlo is also Archduke of Austria and King of Bohemia, he additionally has two other powerful backers, Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor, and Jan Žižka. Of these two, Žižka, the captain of a large Hussite war party, proves to be the most dangerous. Acting on behalf of Laszlo, he occupies most of Upper Hungary, thereby usurping 2/3 of Hungary's income from gold mines. Thus, Ladislaus turns out to be an even more impoverished king than Sigismund or Albert had been. Nonetheless, the greater part of the nobility stands by him. In 1441, Hunyadi achieves a decisive victory over the forces fighting for Laszlo, and thus becomes the favourite of the king. Ladislaus names him captain of the southern frontier and voivode of Transylvania, also lavishing him with land grants so he can maintain an army. While the Hungarians were busy fighting their civil war, in 1440 the Ottomans had attempted to capture Belgrade. Belgrade is the largest and most important fortress on the border, and the key to Hungary itself. Whether by a miracle or due to their still meagre experience in siege warfare, the Ottomans failed to take the castle. This is an important wake-up call for the Hungarians. Therefore, as soon as Hunyadi takes office, he goes on the offensive. In 1441, he launches a devastating raid into Ottoman-controlled Serbia, designed to provoke the Sultan. Local Ottoman forces try to block his retreat, but Hunyadi crushes them with ease. The Sultan prepares his revenge for the next year. In 1442, most of the king's forces are fighting Žižka's army of Hussites in the north. Feeling confident that he can deal with Hunyadi alone, Murad II dispatches 2 armies of Akinjis backed up by regular troops and artillery. One is sent to besiege the Bosnian fortress of Srebrenik, the other to raid Transylvania. Unaware of where the Ottomans would strike, Hunyadi bides his time, gathering his forces close to Belgrade, but not far enough from Transylvania. Most of his army is made up of light cavalry, called the Hussars. The Hussars are armed and armoured similar to the Sipahis. They carry a long lance, a large irregular shield, a sabre, and maybe a warhammer. The Hussars are nimble on the battlefield, but they can also charge as a solid block and press home the advantage. Another type of light cavalry provided by the Sikhs and the Cumans is armed in the traditional horse archer fashion with bow and sabre. The light cavalry is backed up by an elite force of men-at-arms. These soldiers are encased head to toe in plate armour. They ride powerful horses and charge with such ferocity that no Ottoman cavalry can stand in their way. Cavalry makes up 80 to 90% of the Hungarian army and the forces of their Christian allies, for the simple reason that in the raids and counter-raids of border warfare, infantry would be of little use. Nonetheless, Hunyadi also introduces a new type of soldier, the Hussite and his war wagon. These soldiers, armed in the Czech fashion, fight from wagons reinforced with crossbows and firearms. On the battlefield, they can form up at a moment's notice into an unassailable wall of men and wagons. Their role is to protect the flanks and the rear, while mixed groups of light and heavy cavalry take care of business. With this force, Hunyadi waits patiently, all the while monitoring the Ottomans' every move. The Turks enter Transylvania, and manage to defeat a small army hastily gathered by the local lords. Then they march south, and lay siege to the city of Seben. Once thwarted, they begin their retreat, laden with loot and slaves. Hunyadi anticipates their move and blocks their way at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains. He uses his war wagons to guard his flanks, and charges the Ottoman centre with his cavalry. Meanwhile, the pursuers from Seben arrive, and catch the Ottomans in a pincer, completely annihilating them. After the battle, Hunyadi wastes no time, and marches into Wallachia, ousting Vlad and installing the pro-Hungarian Basarab. The Sultan is furious, and in the same year, 1442, he dispatches the Pasha of Rumelia with a very large force containing Sipahis and Janissaries. The Ottomans enter Wallachia unopposed, and despoil the land in all directions. Meanwhile, Hunyadi patiently gathers his forces across the Carpathians. When the time is right, he crosses into Wallachia and catches the Ottomans as they attempt to cross the Danube. Again, he uses war wagons to cover his flanks, then charges in with his cavalry. Once more, the Ottomans are annihilated. Then Hunyadi further exploits his victory, launching successful raids into Bulgaria and Serbia early next year. Since Hunyadi took charge, the Ottomans have seen nothing but defeat. War had been moved from Hungary into the enemy's land, giving the Ottomans a taste of their own medicine. This doesn't go unnoticed in Hungary and beyond. Vladislaus's position becomes secure, and the league headed by Hunyadi is supreme. Abroad, Hunyadi is hailed as the champion of Christianity. Pope Eugenius IV calls for a crusade, and sends his papal legate Cardinal Cesarini to conduct peace talks between Vladislaus and the backers of Laszlo. Sili and Jiskra agree to maintain the peace, but refrain from making any contribution towards the campaign. Some foreign help arrives from Poland, Burgundy, the Pope and Venice, while Serbia and Wallachia promise to contribute sizable contingents. If this wasn't enough, Murad II also has to fight the Karamanid rebels in Anatolia. When Hunyadi sets out with around 25,000 soldiers in October 1443, most of Murad's forces are still in Anatolia. Speed is the key, so the plan calls for Hunyadi to ride ahead with the main force, while the king follows at one day's distance with a smaller force. They face little opposition on their way and take Niš with ease. Here, however, three Ottoman armies converge on Hunyadi simultaneously from three directions, hoping to catch the Hungarians in a pincer. Hunyadi is unfazed and immediately sees the opportunity offered by this situation. In lightning strikes, he defeats all three armies one after the other before they could unite and concentrate their forces. The Ottomans are scattered, but they soon regroup and launch an attack on the king's forces. Hunyadi quickly turns around and together with the king's contingent catches the Ottomans in a pincer, utterly annihilating them. After this, they proceed unopposed and reach Sofia in November. In the meantime, Murad concluded peace in Anatolia and now begins to shift his armies back to Europe. But even so, he doesn't have adequate forces to face Hunyadi in open battle. If the Christians can clear the last mountain passes, the way would be open to Edirne, the Ottoman capital. To prevent this, Murad flows in all he has in a desperate attempt to block the passes. This tactic works, and Hunyadi is finally stopped at the Zlatitsa Pass in December. By now Hunyadi's army is exhausted, so he decides that they had done enough for this year and orders a retreat. The Ottomans try to pursue them, but Hunyadi lays an ambush near Niš, destroying a large force of Akinjis. Seeing this, the Ottomans give up all attempts at pursuit, and the Christians make it back to Hungary. The Long March, as it became known, didn't achieve much, but it did prove Hunyadi's invincibility. The war had finally been shifted from Christian ground to the lands of the heathen. All of Europe, from the Pope to the Burgundians to the Venetians, rejoices, and the possibility of a large and robust crusade is looking ever more likely. It's January 1444. John Hunyadi has just returned from his successful campaign against the Ottomans. As the news of this spreads, all of Christendom rejoices. Such a string of victories against the Turk had not been achieved in living memory. Since the Ottomans showed up on the continent in the 1350s, they almost never lost a major battle. After Nicopolis, Europeans became convinced that the Ottomans were invincible. But John Hunyadi does not believe in such urban legends. He thinks the time is ripe for a vigorous offensive and a decisive battle that would crush Ottoman power in the Balkans once and for all. Europe's monarchs and the Pope think accordingly. They urge Vladislaus to organize a crusade that would be led by Hunyadi and promise to support him. Poland, Venice, Ragusa and Burgundy join in. The plan calls for Venetian and Burgundian galleys to block the Dardanelles, while Hunyadi would make his way into Bulgaria along the Danube. The Serbians, the Wallachians and even the Byzantines promise to join in, while Poland and the Papal States send money and soldiers. Seeing Hunyadi's successes, the Albanians led by George Castrioti, the famous Skanderbeg, have also rebelled and might be able to provide support. The plan makes perfect sense. The Karamanid rebellion in Anatolia had not been broken, and if left to simmer, the Ottomans will have to fight a war on two fronts. Indeed, Murad is more concerned with putting this rebellion down first. Therefore, he needs peace with the Christians to buy himself time, then deal with them once the rebellion is over. To this end, he seeks out the help of Serbia's despot, George Branković. He promises to give him back the whole of Serbia if he can persuade the Hungarians to make peace. To grease the wheels of bureaucracy, Branković promises Hunyadi all his estates in Hungary. This would make Hunyadi the richest man in the country, an attractive proposition to say the least. After consulting with the king, a compromise is reached. They will sign the peace treaty, however they will also continue preparations for war, then renege on the treaty as soon as the army is ready to march. This plan also makes sense. Murad believes he outsmarted the Christians, and unwittingly takes most of his forces to Anatolia, leaving the Balkans nearly undefended. But in practice, such complicated matters never end well. Whether or not it was Murad's prime intention to sow confusion among his enemies, as it turns out, this is exactly what happened. News from the Ottoman side reaches the Venetian and Burgundian fleet first. News of the real state of things arrives later, but by then the fleet is thrown into disarray. Additionally, Branković plans to honour the peace, naively thinking that by remaining neutral, the Ottomans will likewise treat him honourably in the future. Now one of Hungary's most important allies is out of the game. This will prevent any communication with the Albanians. The Byzantines also announced that they will opt to remain neutral. Thus begins the Crusade of Varna in late summer of 1444. Hunyadi, together with the Wallachians and his western allies, barely have 25,000 men. Worst of all, the Karamanid rebellion has been put down. Being secure that his diplomacy won, Murad renounces the throne in favour of his son, Mehmed II. However, when he hears of the Christian attack, he reassumes power and immediately orders his forces to cross back to Europe. To facilitate this, Murad finds an unlikely ally. The Genoese, who have very profitable relations with the Ottomans, offer to help them get across, receiving 1 golden florin for every soldier. The Byzantines remain passive, and the small Venetian Burgundian fleet cannot do very much. By the end of October, the Ottoman army manages to cross. Meanwhile, the Christian army heads east along the Danube. They head south along the road to Edirne. Bigger fortifications are bypassed because Hunyadi wants to get to Edirne as quickly as he can. But his way is blocked at the Shipka Pass. Now the Crusaders are forced to head west. Inexplicably, they stop for several days to besiege Shumen. This gives Murad additional time to prepare his trap. As the Crusaders march towards Varna, the Ottomans discreetly follow them. They enter Varna unopposed. However, as soon as they settle in, Murad arrives with 50,000 soldiers. The next morning, on October 10th, the Ottomans form up for battle. Murad arranges his soldiers in a wide arc, with himself and the Janissaries in the centre, Sipahis on the wings, and Akinjis on the extreme left. Hunyadi spreads out his forces in a thin line, with heavy cavalry mixed in with the hussars. He anchors one flank on the marshland to the south, and the other on the hills in the north. He takes the centre with his best heavy cavalry. His only reserve is the Wallachian light cavalry in the rear. Hunyadi feels secure about his left flank, but he is concerned about the right. This is where he positions his 600 war wagons to further reinforce this side. The first move is made by the Akinjis, who as expected attack the Hungarian right. A battalion is dispatched against them and easily scatters the Akinji. But as soon as the Hungarians stop, they at once resume their attack. More Akinjis attack, and more Hungarians are funneled in to intercept them. Meanwhile, groups of Sipahi also sneak up, using the hills and the forest as cover. They catch the Hungarians off balance and manage to rout them. The panic becomes contagious, and the whole Hungarian right disintegrates. Some seek refuge in the wagon fort, holding up the Ottomans for a while. Others flee all the way to Varna. With disaster unfolding, Hunyadi takes his personal battalion and the Wallachians and counterattacks. Now the Ottomans are caught off balance and are forced to flee. Hunyadi pursues them up to the Turkish lines, then turns back to return to his own lines. But the Wallachians continue the pursuit all the way to the Ottoman camp. Once there, they loot it, consider their job done, and gallop off to Wallachia. Meanwhile, the Ottomans also attack on the other side, but here they have no way to outflank the Hungarians. Their attack is repulsed, and the Hungarians pursue them all the way to the Ottoman lines. But now the second line of Sipahis attacks, and the Hungarians are in turn routed. The Ottomans pursue them, but then Hunyadi, who just returned from the right flank, slams into their side. The Ottoman right flank disintegrates. Hunyadi pursues them, inflicting terrible casualties and putting most of the Ottomans on this flank to flight. By then, the Hungarian right flank is reorganized, and it's starting to look like Hunyadi already won the battle. Up to this point, the king and his retinue of 500 elite Polish knights had remained inactive, all the while Hunyadi achieved a life's worth of glory, all for himself. Thus surmises the 20-year-old Vladislaus when he charges headlong into the dense squares of Janissaries who are just waiting for such an opportunity. The king and his small party penetrate the square and make some decent headway. But soon the masses of bloodthirsty Janissaries close in around them. The king's horse falls and he is cut to pieces. As Hunyadi returns to his lines, he is horrified to see the king's head being paraded around on a pike. Panic grips the Hungarian army. More and more battalions leave the field, as Hunyadi frantically attempts to brace the lines. But to no avail, and by nightfall, he himself has to leave the battlefield. Those on foot are left behind. They take refuge in the Hussite wagon fort, hoping to hold out until the fleet arrives. Next morning, the Ottomans descend on them. By noon, they are overcome and exterminated. The battle that could have been a draw turns out to be a resounding defeat. The king's body is never found. Vladislaus is the first Polish-Hungarian king to die in such a horrid way, but as events will show, he won't be the last. It's November 1444. Hunyadi and the remnants of his army are fleeing north, but alas, the treacherous Wallachians capture Hunyadi. After appropriate threats are made, Hunyadi is released. As soon as he's back in Hungary, the blame game starts. The Battle of Varna had almost been won, according to some opinions. If only the king had not foolishly intervened. If only the Serbs had joined the campaign. If only the Albanians had been more active. If only the Wallachians had not run away. But regardless, Hunyadi shares the least of the blame. On his part, he did everything possible to rout the Turk. This is what most of his countrymen think, and Hunyadi, in spite of his defeat, regains the same prominent position he held before. To reassure his countrymen, Hunyadi immediately goes on the offensive. After the battle, the Burgundian galleys had ranged all over the Black Sea, engaging in acts of piracy as far as Georgia, with varying levels of success. Now they are heading up to the Danube to join up with Hunyadi. Hunyadi himself descends with a small force, and is joined by his Wallachian allies. The combined force achieves limited success, raiding into Bulgaria and Serbia as the Ottomans, themselves badly mauled at Varna, lick their wounds. As for the fate of Vladislaus, initially nothing certain was known. After months of waiting, the Hungarians resigned themselves to his loss. A body of 7 nobles, including Hunyadi, is elected to govern the country. Seeking compromise, Hunyadi and his faction agree to recognize the infant Laszlo as a rightful king, provided Frederick III released him into their custody. This is very important, since the one holding the boy king will gain the full legitimacy of the state for whatever actions he may take. Frederick knows this, and flatly refuses the Hungarians. To make his point clear, he allies with Sili, Hunyadi's arch-enemy, and the two men occupy territories belonging to Hunyadi's league, while Hunyadi is away on campaign. But this backfires terribly, making the Hungarians even more resolute. In June 1446, Hunyadi is elected sole governor of the country, a king in all but name. As the first order of the day, it's decided that Frederick and Sili must pay for their transgressions. Therefore, Hunyadi launches a furious chevauchée ravaging Sili's lands, then turning north into Austria itself. This bold move forces Frederick's hand, and even though King Laszlo is not released, both parties agree to make peace and return to the status quo. Soon enough, peace is achieved with Jiskra too, and for the first time since Sigismund of Luxembourg's death, taxes and revenues can be collected in the entirety of the country. It's no surprise to anyone that Hunyadi intends to use these funds for his upcoming crusade. To secure his flank, he launches 2 small campaigns into Wallachia and Moldova, ensuring their cooperation in the future war. Meanwhile, Murad is busy in Albania. Like Hungary, Albania also has its champion of Christianity, George Castrioti, otherwise known as Skanderbeg. Skanderbeg has been fighting the Ottomans since 1443, using guerrilla tactics to defeat far larger Ottoman armies. He is a natural ally for Hunyadi, and keen to help in a future campaign. Another potential ally is Alfonso V, King of Aragon. The king rules not only parts of Spain, but also the south of Italy. As such, he has a natural interest in the affairs of Albania, being Skanderbeg's prime sponsor. Hunyadi also appeals to the king for help. However, Alfonso's involvement on both sides of the Adriatic intersects with Venice's interest in the region. The Republic makes peace with the Sultan, Ottomans or no Ottomans, and positions itself against Alfonso, Skanderbeg and Hunyadi. Additionally, there is more trouble in Italy. The House of Visconti that ruled Milan had just died out, and the most likely candidate for the throne is a certain mercenary captain by the name of Sforza. Alfonso decides to intervene against a coalition of Venice and Florence. As a result, no help is forthcoming for a crusade. The Pope and Burgundy also declined to help, urging Hunyadi to wait for several more years. Hunyadi can also not count on Serbia, whose despot, George Brankovic, still maintains neutrality, putting his faith in the Ottomans' word. Worst of all, this time there won't be a concurrent rebellion in Anatolia. Murad had concluded a long-lasting peace with the Karamanids, who now fight in his army. On the other hand, Hunyadi is the sole ruler of Hungary, able to marshal all its resources, not being burdened with a troublesome king. Throughout 1448, he gathers his soldiers in the south, amassing an army of nearly 30,000. The plan calls for him to march south, Serbia or no Serbia, and link up with the Albanians. From there, the Allied army would march to Thessaloniki, in order to cut off the Ottomans in Greece and Macedonia, and establish a forward base from where to operate against them. With this premise, the Hungarian army, reinforced by Wallachian and Moldavian contingents, crosses the Danube on the 28th of September. Since Brankovic could not be convinced to join, Hunyadi devastates his lands. In response, Brankovic provides the Ottomans with up-to-date intelligence on the movements of the Christian army. When he hears of the Hungarians coming, Murad promptly leaves Albania, and unbeknown to Hunyadi starts to concentrate his forces in Sofia. The Christian army first makes a feint towards Niš, then turns south to link up with the Albanians. But the Albanians were also at war with the Venetians. After the Ottomans leave, Skanderbeg decides to first have it out with the Venetians, and then march north to link up with Hunyadi. Poor communication between the two means that this will never happen. Murad, on the other hand, has perfect intelligence and begins to follow the Hungarians as soon as they turn south. The Hungarians reach the place of battle on the 15th of November 1448. Kosovo Field, or the Field of Blackbirds, is a vast depression surrounded by mountains and intersected by several trade roads. The Hungarians make their camp on the banks of the small river called the Lab, at the foot of a hill atop which the tomb of Murad I, the victor of the First Battle of Kosovo, is found. 2 days later, on the 17th of November, to the Hungarians' surprise, Murad II's massive army of 50,000 shows up, following the same route where the Hungarians had come. Murad immediately sends his light cavalry to occupy the hill adjacent to the Hungarian camp. Hunyadi recognizes this move and sends the Hungarian right wing to occupy it first. A fierce battle ensues, and the Hungarians occupy the hill. Hunyadi sets up his wagon fort atop the hill, securing a dominant position for himself. With this move, however, he can seize access to the river and thus fresh drinking water to the Ottomans. Murad positions his army in front of the hill in the traditional way, with Janissaries and Azaps in the centre with himself at their head, and Sipahi and Akinji cavalry on the wings. To make sure the Hungarians can't break the centre, he lays out his fortified camp just behind the Janissaries. Hunyadi forms up his soldiers in a single line, with mixed blocks of heavy and light cavalry, and the infantry in the Wagenburg acting as a reserve. The first day of the battle is largely spent with this positioning. The next day, on the 18th of November, Hunyadi decides to take the initiative. He fires up his soldiers and launches both flanks against the Ottomans, a tactic that worked well at Varna. The charge of the Hungarian cavalry sweeps the Ottomans from the field. However, they don't rout, and begin to reorganize themselves. Soon after, they counterattack and start to envelop the Hungarian flanks. Hunyadi recognizes that it's now or never, and determines to do what no Christian army had done before. He launches the full force of his centre against the Janissaries in an attempt to break them. The charge makes good headway, even reaching as far as the Ottoman camp. The infantry too rushes down the hill to join the melee, but to no avail. The Janissaries circle round the cavalry and surround them on all sides. They are unmatched in close quarter combat, and Hungarian cavalry cannot stand its ground. Hunyadi's army breaks on all fronts, and a massive rout ensues, with everyone in the Christian army trying to reach the safety of the camp. Many make it to the hill, and many don't. Hunyadi himself is safe, and straight away begins to reorganize his forces. But to most participants, it's quite obvious that the battle is lost. Groups of cavalry begin to desert even before dusk, others leave later. The Ottomans keep up the pressure all night, skirmishing with the Hungarians. As cannons and bombards illuminate the night, Hunyadi himself has to concede that the battle is lost. As at Varna, the infantry is again left behind. On the morning of the 19th of November, the Ottomans commence their assault on the wagon fort. By noon, all resistance is overcome, and the dream of ousting the Turk with a crusade is extinct for centuries. It's November 1448. Hunyadi and his remaining men are fleeing from the Great Massacre at Kosovo Field. Those who flee south are lucky. They run into the Albanian army that was just a few days' march from the battlefield. Those who flee north through hostile Serbia are less lucky. Hunyadi himself is captured and held for ransom by Brankovic. After the appropriate sums are promised, Hunyadi is released. He still has the backing of most of his people, however after 2 catastrophic defeats, the Hungarian nobility become weary of war. Grudgingly, Hunyadi has to sue for peace. A truce is agreed with Murad, and when Mehmed II becomes Sultan in 1451, a formal peace treaty of 3 years is signed. Mehmed needs this time to complete his grand project. He wants to do what no Ottoman Sultan had done before, capture the great city of Constantinople. Mehmed gathers the largest army and the most numerous and most modern artillery park ever seen. After a 53-day siege that goes exactly as he wanted, he captures the city on the 29th of May, 1453. Right away, Mehmed styles himself the successor to the Roman emperors, and announces his decision to rebuild the empire in his own image. The panic that this causes can hardly be overstated. The fall of Constantinople was long overdue, even though European monarchs kept deluding themselves for centuries that the inevitable will never happen. But the inevitable did happen. Therefore, Pope Nicholas V declares a crusade. Western European monarchs are eager to join, and they all agree on the man who should lead the crusade. However, when it comes to action, Hunyadi is left in the lurch. The talks on the crusade finally collapse in 1455 when Pope Nicholas dies. With no help coming, Hunyadi gathers an army in 1454 to face an imminent attack. But as it happens, the Ottomans instead choose to attack Serbia. Mehmed is no longer bound by treaty, as the 3-year truce had already elapsed. Therefore, Brankovic's ill-gotten gains are taken away in an instant. Hunyadi, besides not being keen on helping Brankovic, only has 10,000 soldiers under his command, so the Ottomans face virtually no resistance. Nonetheless, after the bulk of the Ottomans leave, Hunyadi launches a devastating raid into Serbia and Bulgaria. While this was happening, there were developments on the political front. Due to international pressure, Frederick is finally forced to release the boy king Laszlo into the custody of the Hungarian nobility. However, instead of choosing the most populous faction, Laszlo is sent to Ulrich von Cilly. Predictably, Cilly uses the king to curtail Hunyadi's power, but to no avail. Hunyadi still holds the confidence of his countrymen, even though some minor concessions have to be made. The squabbling for power suddenly stops in April 1456, when news of a massive Ottoman army marching towards Hungary reaches the court. Unaware of where the Ottomans would strike, Hunyadi positions his 10,000-strong army of veterans in the Temes region, midway between Belgrade and Transylvania. Nonetheless, as the most likely target of the attack would be Belgrade, this is where Hunyadi sends most of his reinforcements. Belgrade sits in a strategic position along the main north-south approach into Hungary. Anyone who holds it has a clear path to Buda, as there are no major fortifications between it and the capital. The castle is the largest fortification in the country, situated at the confluence of the Danube and the Sava. The citadel itself sits on a raised promontory, with a fortified city down below. There are around 7,000 defenders made up of soldiers, volunteers, and inhabitants of the city. Mehmed II arrives in the beginning of July. He has around 50,000 soldiers, and the largest artillery train ever seen. Additionally, he has around 200 large war galleys that he dispatches upstream to cut off the city from resupply. The galleys are lashed together with a large iron chain, forming an insurmountable wall across the Danube. But Mehmed fails to complete the encirclement, as the north bank of the Sava is completely occupied by Hunyadi. In addition to his 10,000 soldiers, Hunyadi also commands a band of 30,000 peasants who have gathered for the crusade. The peasants were inspired by the 70-year-old monk Giovanni da Capistrano, who was sent by the Pope to drum up support among the commoners. What these peasants lack in skill and armament, they make up for in courage and determination. Hunyadi instructs Capistrano and his men to set up a defensive position on the banks of the Sava, in order to deny this side to the Ottomans. The original purpose of the Ottoman naval blockade was to cut off one part of the Hungarian army from the other. However, having not completed the city's encirclement, Mehmed in fact isolated part of his army from the main force. Hunyadi spots this mistake and starts to gather his own fleet upstream. These boats are smaller and less numerous, but they are manned by harder and more determined men. Additionally, Hunyadi instructs a small squadron of boats from Belgrade and his infantry on the banks of the Danube to attack simultaneously. Hunyadi's makeshift navy storms the Ottomans on the 14th of July. Initially, the small Hungarian ships make little headway. However, the tide begins to turn when the contingent from Belgrade reaches the Ottoman line. The Ottoman ships are set alight, and the soldiers manning them are killed almost to the last man. The Danube turns red with their blood, as Mehmed begins to wonder whether he bit off more than he can chew. Hunyadi is now free to resupply the city as he may please, and takes command of the defence himself. With his galleys gone and Hunyadi in the castle, Mehmed has no choice but to stay put and concentrate on a frontal assault. Numbers are still in his favour, and his artillery has done tremendous damage to the walls. But whatever the Ottomans destroy by day, the Hungarians rebuild during the night. Mehmed keeps up the bombardment for 17 days. The cannonade suddenly ceases on the 21st of July. Drummers and pipers begin to play, and the Janissaries form up for a general attack. The Ottomans rush the breaches as the Hungarians pour murderous fire upon them. One wave of Janissaries attacks after the other, and the Ottomans' numerical superiority begins to show. By late afternoon, the Ottomans take most of the city. Only the citadel remains firmly in Hungarian hands. But Hunyadi has a nasty surprise in store for the Turk. He saved the best of his soldiers for last. At dusk, he unleashes his armoured cavalry onto the exhausted Janissaries. Panic grips the Ottomans and they begin to flee. Desperate fighting rages into the night, resulting in another victory for the Hungarians. By now, the Ottomans have lost thousands of men with nothing to show for it. All will be lost if the situation is not reversed. Mehmed reasons that the weakest links in the Hungarian army are the crusading peasants. If, by some bold stratagem, they can be destroyed, then the foolhardy Hunyadi may be induced into doing something unwise. To this end, Mehmed decides to employ a trick. He orders his cavalry on the left wing to feign a retreat. As the Ottomans leave the field, the Crusaders attempt to seize the day. In spite of Hunyadi's express orders to stay put, Capistrano boldly leads his men across the river. Groups of Ottomans pounce on the Crusaders as Hunyadi sees disaster unfold. Many defenders also join the melee as more and more Ottomans are funneled into the fight. This is not how Hunyadi wanted to conduct the battle, but now he has no choice. He must exploit the attack, or else he will have to take his losses and cede the initiative to the Turk. He saddles his elite cavalry, assembles them at the gates, and falls on the Ottomans with all his force. The Hungarians attack with such fury that they sweep everything before them. The disorganized groups of Janissaries and Azaps cannot stand their ground. The Ottoman cavalry fails to return in time. Mehmed himself is wounded in the battle, and the Ottoman centre is forced to retreat. The Ottoman guns are first turned on the Ottomans themselves, then they are either carried away or destroyed. Hunyadi's victory is complete. The Ottoman siege guns are destroyed. The Janissaries are decimated. There is no way Mehmed can continue the siege. Before greater misfortune could befall them, they leave the field in ignominy on the 23rd of July, 1456. As the Ottomans leave, Hunyadi is exalted. A relief army headed by the king is on its way to Belgrade. If he can combine his army with the king's, it will surely be possible to sweep the Ottomans from Europe. But alas, this will never happen. Plague had broken out in the camp, and Hunyadi falls to the illness on August 21st. He is followed by Capistrano, who dies a few months later. With Hunyadi's death, the crusade is as good as forgotten. But his goals have at least been partly achieved. The Ottomans have not been driven out of the Balkans, but they were prevented from gaining any ground in Hungary itself. Border raids will continue unabated. However, the Ottomans will not attempt to capture Belgrade for another 65 years. Hunyadi's greatest legacy, his son King Matthias, will continue the fight, be it with a different outlook. During the siege, Pope Calixtus III ordered the bells to be rung at noon to remind the faithful of the crusade. After the victory, this became a tradition, and the bells are rung at noon ever since, in memory of Hunyadi and his victory at Belgrade.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, it helps with the algorithm. Check out my Patreon if you want to help me on this journey. Links down below.